Doing, Casey, we would like to be prompt, so if you would like to begin. So we have Casey Lawrence with us, and she is the Director of the Sunshine Compliance with the Attorney General Office. She will take over the meeting with her presentation, whether it's slides or any other information, and she can tell us how she wants to answer questions, whether it's throughout or during the end.
Okay, I think I have myself off of mute, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. One of the things I have found with Zoom meetings is if I'm doing my presentation, I have to stop sharing my video. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my video for during the presentation. For some reason, it doesn't like it if my video is on for 20 minutes along with my slideshow. So go ahead and feel free to save all your questions till the end, just because with the screen set up the way they are, I won't be able to see if anyone is raising their hand for a question, and the chat bar kind of disappears. So if you could save them all for the end, we'll get to them at the end of the meeting. I'll turn my video camera back on, and we'll go through everything at that point in time. So we're going to talk about the full Sunshine Law. We're going to go through records and meetings. I do want to give you a quick disclaimer. I am not an attorney. I work with a lot of attorneys. So they wrote me this lovely disclaimer that indicates that anything I share tonight is to be considered best practices. These are not official opinions of the Missouri Attorney General's office, and we are not giving you legal advice when we provide this. We're just trying to lay out some processes and procedures that we can kind of pull from the Sunshine Law, and tips and tricks that we have seen be really helpful for other local public governmental bodies. The other disclaimer is from me, simply because this is being recorded. I want to give today's date. Today's date is July 9th, 2020. So that way, in case anyone is reviewing this presentation in the future, they'll know just how long it's been since this was recorded. And of course, you'll always want to check statutes. Statutes change, and they can change every year. So make sure that the source material is accurate. Okay, so we'll start the first part of the presentation with responding to open records requests. And then the second half of the presentation will be handling meetings. So the first thing you have to have when responding to an open records request is a custodian of records. Every single public governmental body has to appoint a custodian. The statute doesn't indicate who has to be the custodian of records, just that you have to have someone that is given that title. You'll notice on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, there's going to be a citation from Chapter 610 and then a page number. If you happen to have one of our Sunshine Law booklets, it'll correspond to that page number. If you're using our online Sunshine Law booklet, it's the same page number. So feel free to read up on anything further. I do try to give just the Cliff Notes version of the statute. All right, so after you have a custodian of records selected, once the custodian receives the open records request, they have to act on the request as soon as possible and no later than 3 days after the request was received by the custodian. Generally, the very next question I get after I say that is, well, what if our custodian's not here? What if she's on vacation? What if she's out sick? We do count that differently. If you have a custodian of records that is going to be out and you know that that's coming up, it may be helpful to let staff and the public know that that's something that's going on. If your custodian of records only works, Monday through Thursday, it may be helpful when you respond to constituents to let them know those are the custodian's hours so that if they send in a request on a Friday, they know that Friday is not going to start that time clock because the custodian's not there. Generally, if you have someone on vacation or extended sick leave, sometimes your custodian of records may go on maternity leave. They may not be there for quite some time. Try to make sure that you're still providing some sort of communication for those constituents, letting them know that, yes, we understand we have 3 days. Our custodian is supposed to be returning on this date. We'll have a response for you 3 days after the custodian returns. So again, if a custodian gets a request on a Monday and they have a normal work schedule, they would have to provide a response no later than the end of Thursday for that requester. You need to contact the requester in writing so that both parties have a copy of the response. That's a practical tip, not a statutory requirement. The statute, in fact, never discusses the way you need to respond or the way that a constituent can request records. We always encourage a body to respond in writing so that you have a copy of what you sent and the requester has a copy of what you sent. In your written response, it can be an email, it can be a letter, but just make sure the date that the response was sent is included on the correspondence. I have actually been shocked by how many times I have opened up a letter and there wasn't a date on it. That really needs to be included considering these condensed time frames that we're dealing with the Missouri Sunshine Law. In your written request, you can confirm what records you understood to be requested. For example, if someone says, I want a copy of all meeting minutes, well, if you have multiple bodies that all have, you have multiple agencies within the body that all have meetings, you can confirm that with the requester. Dear Mrs. Lawrence, thank you for your request. We understand that you're looking for all meeting minutes from, January through June of 2020. Please note that that includes both board meetings, but also planning and zoning, parks and rec, things like that. Whatever types of agencies you would have that happen to have those meeting minutes, you can confirm that with them. But you can also use this time to request clarification. You can ask the requester, dear Mrs. Lawrence, if you did not need board meeting minutes for all of the other, subcommittees, please let us know. Try to address possible fees as soon as possible. A lot of entities and requesters don't know that there's going to be a set of fees involved. If they've never requested anything from a public governmental body, they may not be aware of that. So try to let them know as soon as you can. And then also confirm the way that records will be provided. Are you going to email the records? Is the requester going to physically stop by the office and pick them up? Or are we gonna, put a stamp on things and put it in the mail? And here's a statutory requirement. If the public governmental body is keeping its records in an electronic format, it is strongly encouraged to provide access to its public records to members of the public in that format. This is kind of buried towards the back of the Sunshine Law, but what it kind of feels like they're getting at is that if you have all of this electronic information, don't just try to print it out to, make sure you get 500 pages that you can charge 10 cents a page for. Now, obviously, we have constituents who don't have access to the internet. If they don't have access to the internet, they don't have access to a way to read digital information. Oh, I apologize, I moved that slide forward too quickly. If they don't have a way to access that type of electronic information, you will need to take steps to provide it to them in paper format. So if you cannot produce the records within 3 days, you will still need to contact the requester within that time frame. There are times when you get a large request or you get a request for records that are, much older, or you get a request for records, 2 days before the water bills are due. There are things that happen where you won't be able to produce all of the records necessary within 3 days, but you still have to reach out to the requester at that point in time. You still have to communicate with them. I always like to see a public, I always like to see a public governmental body, work on providing that request as soon as possible, but we know that it can't always happen. So if you do have to write that letter where it says, dear requester, thank you for your request. We cannot produce the records, as of right now. You need to provide an estimated time of when the request can be fulfilled and the reasonable cause for the delay. So the estimated time of when the request can be fulfilled, that is absolutely an estimate. I have found myself a few times in this job where I have estimated that I could get something done in 3 months. Of course, I can go through and get all the information and get it done in 3 months. But then I got into the project and it got to be a lot more information than I had expected. And I realized it was going to take me longer and I was probably going to need 4 months. That's fine. Just try and let the requester know as soon as you know. As soon as you realize, hey, I thought we were looking at 500 documents. It looks like we're going to be searching through about 700, 800 documents. We need more time to do this. Try and keep the requester in the loop. Giving them updates is incredibly helpful. Requesters can be very, very reasonable as long as you're providing them information. You also need to give them the reasonable cause for the delay. Sometimes that's just the size of the request. Dear Mrs. Lawrence, thank you for your request of 5 years worth of meeting minutes. Obviously 5 years worth of anything is going to be difficult to get a hold of in 3 days. But giving that as your reason, provides the requester with the cause for the delay. Some other requests are simply, hey, we have to go back through and, some of these records are only in paper, or we have to request the paper from offsite storage, or, the person who handles the fiscal records is out for a week for vacation and she won't be able to return until this date, and then we'll be able to start work on your request. Just whatever that reasonable cause is, make sure it's included in your response. Closed records. So you need to provide the requester with the reason for the closure if it's closed. While your attorney can tell you, yes, these records are closed, the statute requires that you have to not only say it's closed, but give that specific citation of law. And I find that it's helpful to actually tell the requester what that citation means. So let's say the requester has asked for, copies of meeting minutes where the body met in closed session to discuss something with their attorney. It's very likely that, the entire contents of those meeting minutes, except for the, opening and the adjourning vote, are closed. You'll need to give them the citation. So you'd give them 610.021 subsection 1, but not everybody walks around with a sunshine law booklet in their back pocket. So you might want to tell them that the reason you're closing it is because it's for, legal work product. You were discussing, legal work product. Our attorney attended the meeting, and that's why it was closed. You may have to also redact information. Sometimes we see records that have both open and closed information. You'll need to separate the exempt from the non-exempt material. If someone requests a form that has a Social Security number on it, you can't just close the entire record because of one Social Security number. You have to redact the Social Security number and then provide the rest of the non-exempt material. Excuse me. So, closed record description. You also need to provide a response that generally describes the exempted material, unless, of course, that description would reveal the contents of the exempt information. For some records, that's quite easy. Dear Mrs. Lawrence, thank you for, requesting the meeting minutes from our meeting on July 7th. That meeting was closed for a discussion with our auditor, and those meeting minutes will be closed because they reflect that discussion. It doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, again, just a general description, but same for redacted information. Redaction is considered the same as a closed record. You have closed part of the information that would have been provided. So you need to, again, provide that closed records description. Usually for redaction, it's even simpler. Dear Mrs. Lawrence, you'll notice that field 12 has been redacted. Field 12 contains a social security number. It's almost unnecessary now to even just tell people, why you had to close it or provide citations of law. Most people are very aware that you have to close a social security number. But of course, as the public governmental body, we still have to follow all the rules and provide extra information. What if you don't have any records responsive to the request? This happens. You may get a request for information that you've never created, or get a request for a report that's no longer created. If you get a request for information that you do not have, you still need to send a response to the requester to let them know there are no records responsive to the request. Dear Mrs. Lawrence, thank you for your request for a copy of the meeting minutes from our meeting on July 3rd. July 3rd was a holiday for the city, and we did not have a meeting on that date. That's just a little extra information to let them know this is why we don't have anything. But we also have case law to back this up. So case law, we rely on Jones v. Jackson County Circuit Court, which was decided in 2005. And that is where the court held that you do not have to create a new record upon request, only provide access to existing records held or maintained by the public governmental body. I also have to use this every once in a while when I'm asked for lists. I don't know what it is, but in the last 3 to 4 years, lists have become a very popular request item. I don't know if it's the rise of listicle type articles online or in newspapers, but people will ask me things like, well, can I get a list of all of the Sunshine Law complaints against entities in Cole County for the past year? I don't have a list that has that type of information. There's no work purpose for me to create a list of just Cole County entities that received Sunshine Law complaints in the last year, because that's not how we handle them. I could give them a copy of every single complaint I received against an entity in Cole County for the last year, and they can create a list, but I don't have to create that list for them. Okay, there's also a records retention schedule. There are 2 types of schedules here, and I didn't know if you as the city actually handled your local police records or not, but I included it on here. There's also a chance that you could get a request for records that you have destroyed based on your records retention schedule. Your records retention schedule is set by the local records division of the Missouri Secretary of State's office. There's a general records retention schedule. There's a police clerk schedule. There are a few other schedules on there that might be helpful for how you set up your records, but it will let you know how long you need to keep records and the best way to destroy them. Since those are handled by a different state agency, I won't be able to answer a lot of questions on that. But I can tell you that Dr. Korsick, he is the director of the local records division, and he's been there, 25 years. So he'll be able to answer any questions you have about that type of scheduling and what to do with those records. So fees for open records request. When you get an open records request, you are allowed to charge fees for fulfilling those open records requests. The search, research, and duplication time can be charged at an hourly fee not to exceed the average hourly rate of pay for the clerical staff, and it's only charged for the actual cost of the research time. So, for example, our chief on our division, she could stand there and make copies, but we can't charge for her time to stand there and make copies. We would have to charge whatever it would have cost us for the lowest paid legal secretary to make those copies. That's because anyone in our office could use the copy machine, not just our chief. So we can't allow a public governmental body to just kind of rack up the cost by having somebody higher paid go and make copies when that's obviously a task that anyone can take on. Copying fees are not to exceed 10 cents a page for paper that is legal size or smaller. Any discs, tapes, or electronic medium are charged at cost. So if you happen to have like a thumb drive, you just charge at that exact cost. So if that thumb drive costs you $7.50, you can pass on that $7.50 for that thumb drive. Recently, we've had some concerns pop up simply because, a constituent may have their own thumb drive, right? They've gotten one before, it's not completely full. So they'll ask if you can just put the information on their thumb drive. We understand that that could be a cost savings method, but that is a very big security risk. You do not know what is on that thumb drive, and there could be, malware, there could be some other suspicious things on there. We don't want to say that that's exactly what's happening, but it is generally recommended by IT departments to, do not accept a thumb drive from a stranger. Make sure that, you are purchasing those thumb drives from a reputable dealer, and that you are using them, for your work and then providing them to the constituents. And then, of course, things like maps, blueprints, plats, those are all specialty items. Those are charged at the cost of recreating the item. Obviously, a map is going to be a lot more expensive than 10 cents a page. So fee collection. You can request payment of these copying fees prior to making the copies. We do have constituents who are, sometimes irritated by this. They don't like to pay a fee for starters. It's a very common complaint I get on about a weekly basis. They'll call the office and say, I pay my taxes, why should I have to pay for these Sunshine Law records? And it's because it's allowed by statute. So, being very precise in your estimates is helpful. But then also, letting the constituent know that they'll get a refund if you happen to go under the estimated cost is helpful. So a practical tip is to alert the requester before you fulfill the request of what the expected costs will be. This is really important because sometimes requesters, with them not knowing that there's going to be a fee, will get sticker shock at the end. They'll show up to pick up the records, and the clerk will tell them, oh, okay, that'll be $75. And $75 is a lot of money. They didn't know that was going to be happening. They didn't prepare for it. So please let them know as soon as you are aware that there's going to be fees, that there's going to be something that they'll have to pay for. One of the things that we like to see, and we provide this in our open records request form, is when requesters give you a set amount when they make the request. So the requester will tell you, please alert me if the cost will be over $50, or please alert me if the cost will be over $100. They let you know up front that they're aware of the fee structure. But if they haven't let you know in that first request letter that they are aware of the fee structure, don't assume that they know, and try to communicate that to them as soon as you can. This second section on the slide where I talk about how you can explain in writing how the body arrived at the fee, this is not a statutory requirement, but we have found that it is incredibly helpful in explaining to the constituent how you arrive at the fee. That you break it up into research time, if you're going to have sheets of paper or thumb drives provided, putting that out on an itemized list. Some agencies actually, churn out a full invoice. And that's helpful too when you look at your billing and your audit records, so you can see what you're charging for on that invoice. This is also helpful if you're having more than one person work on the request. You may have a clerk making copies of the meeting minutes, but if there were also some emails requested and there had to be an IT search, then an IT employee who might be making more than the clerk, their hourly salary will have to be taken into consideration as well. Breaking that down for the constituents is very helpful. They don't call us the show me state for nothing. People like to know where their money is being spent. Okay, so we've covered open records requests. I generally cover that pretty quickly for boards, mostly because you all are not fulfilling the open records request. If it would be more helpful, I could go ahead and take any questions about public records now before we get into the public meetings section, if you have any at this point.
I have a question.
Okay.
So for individuals who say they apply for positions, say that we had someone that said, I think that I was unfairly treated as it relates to the hiring practices, and I would like to see the evaluation sheet for the other candidates or their application or something like that. Is that something that can be sunshine request?
Well, everything can be included in a request. It's the public governmental body's responsibility to parse out what's open and what's closed. Generally, we see things like individually identifiable employee records listed in Section 610.021 sub 13, and that's a closure statute. That's something that you are allowed to close. Of course, I can't give you a specific answer. You'll want to talk to your attorney. If you get that type of request and it looks like it might be for information about employees or applicants for employment, that's included in there as well. You might want to consider sharing that so that they can let you know whether or not that's closed, provide the citation, and things like that for the requester. I mean, that's information. I mean, even for somebody else who didn't get the job, say I applied for a clerk's position and I wasn't hired. You still have my full application on file, and that is likely to be a closed record if you choose to close it.
Okay, so is there a amount that individuals can charge that is apparent that they could possibly be attempting to overcharge to deter the person? Do they ever get a violation for?
There's no dollar amount set in the Sunshine Law. You want to make sure that it's the lowest hourly rate of pay for the lowest paid employee who could possibly perform the task. I mean, if we've got our interns in the office, and obviously our interns are going to make the least, but there's some stuff that they can't do because they're interns. So there's some records that they can't have access to. There's some work product that they can't deal with. Obviously, they're not getting into the human resources records or our financial services records. So we have to charge the salaries of those individuals. For state employees, it's a little easier, mainly because our salaries are posted online. And we get checked really quickly if anyone thinks that we're possibly putting more on a bill than what the hourly rate of pay would be, because most people can look that salary up and divide that salary by 52 weeks and 40 hours a week and come up with that hourly rate. But there's nothing as far as a hard dollar amount listed in the Sunshine Law.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, I
Did
have
anyone
a
else
question.
have? Yes.
Okay, my question is, I know that we don't have to create something that we don't already have, but you did mention that we would give the person an actual request. If someone is requesting something and we don't have a record created like that, would we give them the actual request that came in?
So like, for an example, I make an open records request and I say, I would like a copy of your land usage report. And you all don't have a land usage report.
I was actually, I'm sorry, Casey. I was actually talking about the example that you used, that if someone asks for.
Oh, they asked for a list and
Yes,
I would just give them the actual documents. Yeah, because that's what I do have. I have those complaints. So I would offer that to them. I would say, hey, do you want a copy of all these complaints? The complaints are open records. I can compile all of these in a folder for you, make a copy, send them over. But then I'm not sitting there, going through the complaint and going, okay, this one's about Cole County EMS, and this one's about, City of Jefferson.
I got you.
I don't have to, do that.
Okay,
thank you. I know our staff have to do a lot. One thing off the plate, at least.
Right. I have one other question on this area. Okay. What if the custodian of records is on vacation and the Sunshine request comes to he or she's email, but no one in the office has that password? Would that company be penalized if it's after 3 days?
Not generally. I mean, that's really a question for a judge. When our office has dealt with those types of issues before, we have just encouraged the body to, make sure that when your custodian of records goes on vacation, that you prepare for that. That you say, okay, all of this needs to be forwarded to someone else, or leave someone your password so they can get in, or just having an automatic response set up.
Exactly.
Yeah. Dear constituent, thank you for your email. Please note I am out of the office. If this is an open records request, I expect to respond 3 days after the date I return. And that'll generally give them a good amount of information. And again, most constituents, completely understand that people are going to go on vacation, they're going to have maternity leave, the office might close for an extra day or two at Christmas. These are just things that happen in life. It's when they don't get the information that's when they start to get concerned, and that's when I start to get emails because they like that communication.
Okay, thank you.
One last question.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Mayor.
What if a board member decided that they want to fire somebody or get rid of them? Is it proper for them to sunshine that hiring record and to dig around to justify what they want to do? Is that proper?
Well, there's no special access to closed records for board members. So a board member would still only have access to all of the same records that a member of the public would have. If a board member would like to get access to an otherwise closed record, the body would have to vote on that. Now, it does happen. There are times where a board member or a group of board members will have to look at some closed information in order to make decisions for the town. You may have to look at some of the information about health insurance if you're considering moving the city staff to a new provider. You may have to look at a lot of background and salary information if you're considering giving raises to employees that have obtained their bachelor's and their master's degrees. That type of information can be voted on and members can be given access, but they wouldn't have that just by benefit of being a board member.
Okay. My question is, if a person wants a review only, like they want to just come in and look at files and not get a copy, is that permissible? And would there be a less of a fee, or how would that work in the instance where they want to do a review only, where they come in and just look at files, or they may want to use their cell phone and take pictures of that document on their own? What does that normally look like?
The fees can sometimes be a little less in those review only. It depends a lot on what format those records are already in. I mean, if you have a great big formal ledger book that has your ordinances in it, and it's one of those where it's kind of, chained to a desk, sure, come on in anytime you want. It's open, it's available, take as many pictures as you need. It's fine. If we're talking about, view only for emails, that's different, because then you'd have to set up a computer for the requester to sit at and go through, versions of those emails that can't be manipulated. So just a way to view them on a computer, but only be able to advance through the screens, not actually be able to edit or send or anything like that with the emails. And that can actually be more expensive than just forwarding on the copies of the emails. So I hate to give this answer because I always get frustrated when the attorneys in the office tell me, but it depends. It just depends on the format and the content and, how much was requested. Sometimes videos are easier to watch, at a location, especially if it's, something that's still under investigation. And sometimes it's just easier to email a copy over to the person and let them, go through it at their leisure. Okay. Any other questions about open records requests or fulfilling those, or the fees, or? Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and go on to public meetings. I'm going to go back and take my video off again, and we'll go to presentation. All right. So public meetings. And, sorry. All right, so a public meeting definition. Any meeting of a public governmental body subject to section 610.010 to 610.030, at which public business is discussed, decided, or public policy formulated. Now, a lot of us are used to these meetings happening just one way, in person. We're used to going down to City Hall. We see our board, they're sitting behind a table or a series of podiums, and the public sits out in chairs in the audience, and we watch the meeting take place. This is how most people are used to seeing a public meeting occur. Now, obviously, the last 4 months have changed that a bit. We have gotten more used to online and electronic communication. But that is also a way that meetings can take place. You can have a Zoom meeting like this. You can even have a conference call, an online chat, or an internet message board. These are all things that are described in the statute about having a meeting. So I don't want anyone to assume, especially not anymore, that a meeting has to be all the members physically gathered. you can have that quorum gathered virtually. The term shall also include a public vote of all or a majority of the members of a public governmental body by electronic communication or any other means conducted in lieu of holding a public meeting with the members of the public governmental body gathered at one location in order to conduct public business. This is a very important point to make simply because a lot of boards have gotten themselves into trouble. A lot of boards will send around emails and they'll say, how do you feel about painting the park benches? I just drove through town. They're all looking really shabby. We need to get this done as soon as possible. So we have it done, before the town centennial, something like that. Not that, painting the park benches is a bad idea or that is something, the public wouldn't mind having done. But if you, send around an email that says, are you in favor of, painting the public park benches? And everybody says, yes, 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 that's fine. All the members or a majority of the public governmental body does that. And then, 2 days later, you have maintenance staff out in the city, painting the park benches and refreshing them. At that point, it seems like a public vote. It seems like the body all got together and they decided that, yes, this is something that they want to happen, and it's now happening. That's something we want to make agencies very aware of. You can have those public votes, but you need to make sure that you're following all the other rules if you're going to have an electronic meeting. When you just have those emails pop up, sometimes there's no intent to have a meeting and it just kind of happens, it breaks out. So we want to make sure that agencies are very aware of this portion so that they know to kind of be guarded in that type of electronic communication if it's not been officially listed as a meeting. A public vote is defined as any vote, whether conducted in person, by telephone, or by any other electronic means cast at any public meeting of any public governmental body. So the public vote and the public meeting definitions kind of lean on each other, but again, those are all found on page 32 of our booklet. So what's not a meeting? The term public meeting shall not include an informal gathering of members of a public governmental body for ministerial or social purposes when there is no intent to avoid the purposes of this chapter. I have underlined that portion of the definition simply because it's referenced in the case of Colombo v. Buford. And in that case, the body was getting together in small little groups that they had kind of said, oh, this isn't a meeting, we're just getting together and chatting, there's only 2 or 3 of us. But the intent was purposely to circumvent the Sunshine Law. And in that case, the body got in trouble. So I do want to make sure that intent is very, very important. We don't want to see, groups getting together, okay, 2 people got together, there wasn't a quorum, they decided to paint the park benches, person A went and talked to person C, and A and C both decided to paint the park benches, and you just kind of have, like those chain letter type of meetings. That was in the Colombo v. Buford decision. We do have it referenced in our Sunshine Law booklet, but of course, it's not the full text of the decision. That is available online, though, for anyone who wants to read through. We also want to point out that ministerial and social purposes, aren't considered meetings. If you voted on Tuesday night to pay, all the bills that the clerk brought to your attention, and then on Thursday, the board members whose names are on the account, they come in and they sign all the checks, that's ministerial work. That's already been voted on. That's something that, you discussed it at the public meeting. Everybody knows it's going to happen. but you have to physically have these people come in and write their names on a piece of paper so that it can be paid. And then there's social purposes. I mean, I don't know if your city had a 4th of July, any festivities. I know it was hard with all the social distancing, but if you get together for those social purposes, you know, Christmas parties, retirement functions, things like that, those are social. We hope a meeting doesn't break out. You know, please don't ruin a perfectly good holiday party with business talk if you can avoid it. That's a social purpose, and we don't expect that to be considered a meeting. We also know that there are some towns that are small enough that, you know, going to the grocery store on Saturday, you can have a quorum of officials all end up in an aisle. That's fine. It's social. You all don't have to run away from each other or anything like that. Just make sure that you're not discussing public business at that time. We do know that public meetings are often given a lot of different names by the local public governmental bodies, and that's good. Things like work sessions, things like budget meetings, or, you know, the quarterly emergency preparedness meeting. Those are all great because they provide the board members and the public extra information about the type of meeting that they're going to be attending. The problem is the Sunshine Law only gives you 2 options. They say it either has to be open or it has to be closed. So no matter what type of meeting you're having, you have to make sure that it fits into one of those buckets. If you're having a work session and you're not discussing anything that's a closed meeting topic, then it's likely going to be open. If you're having an executive session where you're going to vote on who to hire for the new clerk position, that's likely closed. So again, your definitions for types of meetings are very important, and you should continue to use those. But those definitions don't automatically give the meeting its open or its closed status. That all depends on a statutory citation for closure. So meeting notices and agendas. When you're going to have a meeting, you have to post a meeting notice. It must be posted 24 hours in advance of a public meeting, exclusive of weekends and holidays. So if you were going to have a meeting on this past Monday, the 6th, and your office was closed on the 3rd for the holiday, then you would have had to post your meeting notice on Thursday for a meeting on Monday, because Friday, Saturday, and Sunday would have been considered weekends and holidays, and they would not have counted for that 24 hours. And for our office, we would look at 24 hours being, you know, from 5 o'clock on Monday to 5 o'clock on Tuesday. That's the 24-hour clock that we look at. Posting an emergency meeting notice. The body must post the notice as soon as possible and then provide the good cause for not posting the meeting notice at least 24 hours in advance in your meeting minutes. That's the statutory requirement. However, the meeting minutes aren't going to come out until after the meeting is over. If you have posted an emergency meeting notice, it may be a better practice to also include that good cause on the meeting notice, letting people know in advance why you needed to post this meeting notice and why you needed to have this meeting with fewer than 24 hours notice to them. I think it's nice to have it in the meeting minutes. It provides a very good record of what was occurring. You know, announcing it at the meeting is very helpful. But the first that people are going to know about this meeting is going to be that meeting notice. And it's always best to try and provide as much information up front as you can. Again, putting it on the notice is not statutorily required, but especially during these past 4 months where we've had a lot of unexpected and emergency meetings being held by agencies across the state, we found that posting that good cause as early as possible really cut down on a lot of tensions among the board members and between the board members and the members of the public. Meeting notice requirements. You must have the time, date, place, tentative agenda, and the meeting mode listed on the meeting notice. And by mode, I mean, are you meeting in person at City Hall? Are you going to meet online? Is this just going to be a telephone conference call? You need to let the constituents know that information in advance. If you're going to have an online meeting or a telephone meeting, you need to provide that access information on your meeting notice. You need to say, here is the web address to get to our meeting, or here is the number to call in and listen to our meeting. That needs to be on the notice. The tentative agenda that's required must reasonably advise the public of the matters to be considered. Topics such as new business and unfinished business are not standalone. If you tell people that you're going to discuss new business and unfinished business at your meeting, they're going to have no idea what you're going to talk about. That really doesn't provide them any reasonable information about what you're going to discuss. Possible topics could be an ordinance. Try to include the ordinance number. Try to include the ordinance topic. Another issue that comes up with ordinances is that if you post that meeting notice 24 hours in advance and you say, okay, we're going to discuss ordinance number 57-2020, people may want to get a copy of that ordinance in advance of the meeting. You want to make sure that your clerk or your custodian of records is prepared for that. Having extra copies printed off in advance, bringing extra copies to the meeting, putting the ordinance language online. I've even seen some cities, they'll put it on a slide and they'll just project it onto the wall. And this is the ordinance, everybody can read it, everybody can see it all at the same time. That's helpful if you've got a high-tech setup, but providing that extra information about the ordinances is really helpful to constituents in advance of the meeting. I know that if you post the notice 24 hours in advance and somebody makes a request that day, it would seem like you wouldn't have to provide them the ordinance in time for the meeting. However, it's going to be very difficult, I feel, for you to discuss with the judge why you couldn't provide that ordinance to a requester within 24 hours of the meeting, within the meeting time, when you were able to provide it to all of the board members and you were able to discuss it at the meeting. I feel like that would be a difficult argument to make. If you're going to have other discussion topics, try to describe them. We're discussing a stop sign. Okay, that's great. Are we discussing a stop sign on Main Street? Are we discussing a stop sign in the newly annexed area of town? Where is the stop sign going to be? Any topic that the body plans to vote on should be on the agenda. That is really something our office can look for, and I know it's something that the auditor's office will definitely be able to check. If you voted on something, was it a topic that was actually listed on your agenda? If there will be a public comment period, that should be on your agenda as well. The agenda should cover your public comment period rules. Those are not covered by the Sunshine Law. Your public comment period is something you have to set up at your city level. If you need people to sign up beforehand, or if you need people to let you know what topic they want to discuss, or if you only have a 5-minute time frame, those are all important things that you need to let people know ahead of time so they're prepared for your public comment period. A lot of cities just have that posted permanently inside the meeting room so that constituents are aware of it in advance. If you're going to have any closed meetings or closed portions of the meeting, provide that citation of law. It needs to be written out 610.021, and then subsection, 1 through 24, whichever one you need. Provide that on the agenda to reasonably inform the public of what you're going to discuss. And then meeting mode, are you going to have it online, telephone conference call, video broadcast? I've seen a couple Facebook Live meetings recently for entities that can't afford their own web page, so they used their free Facebook page and just made a Facebook Live meeting. It works well in areas where you have strong broadband, but not so great in areas where the internet connection is poor. And in person, I don't know when in-person meetings will start back up again, but those are still some of the most well-attended meetings, I know. Notice location. Generally, you need to just post that meeting notice in, on a bulletin board or in the office at the location where the meeting's going to take place, or wherever the main office is of your agency. That's where the notice has to be posted. But if you're going to meet by an internet chat, message board, or other computer link, you have to also post that notice on your website in addition to the principal office. So once you start using an online meeting, you also have to start posting that notice online as well. So here's just a quick sample meeting notice, a notice of public meeting for the City Council. It's going to be at 6 p.m. on October 21st. I like to give the name of the building along with the address. I moved around a lot as a daughter of a member of the Air Force, so we moved to towns where I didn't know where everything was all the time. So just the name of a building wasn't always helpful. Right now we mostly all have Google Maps, and I could probably look up the name of the building and be just fine. But a little extra information, never caused a problem. So a meeting agenda, there's going to be a call to order, a roll call vote, approval of minutes. Any unfinished business would be the city budget. And then under new business, approval of a new sunshine law policy. Those are still perfectly fine groupings, but they can't be the only information that you provide on the agenda. Public comment period, a vote to close the meeting pursuant to 610.021 sub 8. After the sub 8 RSMO, you don't have to include any of the other information, but again, just because people don't walk around with a sunshine law booklet in their back pocket, I like to give that extra bit of information about why we're closing. This one would be for the discussion of welfare cases of identifiable individuals. People then understand why you're going into closed session. If you just throw a number at them, they might start to mistrust. Again, we are the show me state. We really like to know what's going on, especially with a closed meeting, because constituents know they won't be able to attend. They won't be able to see it for themselves. So they really do want to know what topics you're going to be discussing. And at this point, it's listed in the statute, and you're going to be discussing the discussion of welfare cases. And then a vote to adjourn the meeting. Our office, we're lucky we have multiple buildings where we can post the notice, and we also have our website where we can post information. I like to post the online information with information about the physical posting, and I like to see the physical posting also include information about any online posting as well. Trying to make sure they mirror each other is really helpful. Your online posting is going to have an audit trail. The minute you post that meeting agenda online, it's going to have a date and a time attached to it in the metadata. This is incredibly helpful if you ever need to provide that as an audit trail saying, yes, we provided this information and we provided it more than 24 hours in advance. It's not perfect though, because only in certain circumstances is the electronic notice required. But even in situations where we've had to deal with a complaint about a physical notice, our office did take note of the fact that the digital notice was posted in a timely manner. It's not going to cover anything if your physical notice wasn't posted in a timely manner, but the clerk indicated to our office that she posted the physical notice and then posted a scan of the physical notice online, which was helpful while we were investigating. It's not perfect, but again, it provides a lot of good background information. I also like to provide custodian of record information at the bottom of an agenda, just because people may want to get a copy of something that is going to be discussed at the meeting. So again, that's another good reason to make sure your custodian of records is prepared in advance of a meeting with copies of documents that people may want to get. Being prepared for those types of meetings generally makes things go a lot more smoothly. Just being able to provide records quickly before a meeting relieves a lot of stress. I also know that while the electronic notice isn't required right now, it may be helpful, especially in this time of social distancing, to try and provide electronic notices, simply because members of the public may be hesitant to kind of all crowd around a doorway. It's very unlikely that you'll see 3 or 4 people who want to stand in close quarters right now to read an online document, and they may prefer instead to pull the information up on their computer or their phone. Okay, so you've had your meeting notice, you've started your meeting, and now you have to take meeting minutes. Every meeting you have must have meeting minutes. Closed meetings, workshops, budget meetings, executive sessions, every time you meet as a public governmental body, you must take meeting minutes. Those meeting minutes must include the date, time, place, members present, and members absent, a record of all votes taken, indication of a closed session if one was held, and a good cause statement if necessary. So again, if you had that emergency meeting where you had to provide good cause, you need to make sure that that information is included in your meeting minutes. You don't have to provide these types of headers, but some clerks choose to. They'll list date, time, and place at the top. They'll even sometimes give the time that the meeting started. So let's say that the meeting was scheduled to begin at 7, and the clerk notes meeting was scheduled to start at 7. All board members arrived by 7:15 due to poor weather. So meeting started at 7:16 with all members in place. We also like to see specifically listing out all of the members present, and the statute does require members absent as well. A lot of clerks fight me on this. They're like, well, if I list who's present, you automatically know who's not there. That's not entirely true. We can look at the election rosters and the election rolls, and we can see who was elected, but we don't always know who resigned or who was impeached, or who may have moved out of the area and can no longer serve. We don't know that information in the middle of an election term. So you need to be able to mention who was absent, and it's also helpful at the next meeting to kind of list. Alderwoman Lawrence moved out of the district on July 15th. She is no longer serving as an alderwoman for our town. Putting that in a set of meeting minutes, because they're a permanent record, is very helpful. It provides that kind of information that we can go back and review if we need to know who was taking votes. Good cause statement. It needs to explain why you provided less than 24 hours of notice, but also if you did not have a meeting at a place that was reasonably accessible to the public. One time a board had to meet at a location in one of their parks because it had been broken into and vandalized and then set on fire. So they kind of had to make the decision as to whether or not they even wanted to keep it, but they wanted to see the extent of the damage. So they had the meeting at the building. It was not reasonably accessible to the public. It was a little difficult to get to, but they listed that in the meeting, that because the board members needed to see the building themselves to make a decision, and they wanted to have the meeting there, that's the good cause. They then held a meeting back at City Hall where they actually took a vote on the matter, but that meeting to discuss their options was held, kind of out in the middle of a ball field. You also need to provide good cause if you cannot meet at a time that is reasonably convenient to the public. So if you're, used to having your meeting that, say 7 o'clock at night or 6:30, and then all of a sudden you have a meeting at, 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning, that may not be reasonably convenient to the public. I mean, a lot of people, may be attending church services, or, some people still have to work on the weekends. It's not something that's convenient to everyone. But if you had to meet, then you need to provide that good cause statement in your minutes as to why you had to meet at that time. And you also need to provide a good cause for why you're meeting in a different way. Why are you having a Zoom meeting that people who don't have access to the internet won't be able to attend when you could have had an in-person meeting? At that point, the body will have to describe things, due to the current public health crisis, and the requirements for, social distancing, and considering, the health and safety of our members and our constituents, we decided to meet via Zoom. That's important information. But again, meeting minutes come out much later than the actual meeting. And while the statute does require this information to be in your meeting minutes, if you can provide this on your meeting notice and your meeting agenda, we encourage that. We have found that it really stops a lot of complaints and questions in their tracks when the public is given that information up front. Okay, so statutory requirements for recording a meeting. Members of the public can record all open meetings. They can make both an audio or video recording. A public governmental body is allowed to establish guidelines regarding these recordings, but they cannot stop that. There are certain bodies that already record everything, and so they just set up their own recording device and then just provide copies to everyone. But most cities don't do that, and they just come up with guidelines for the public, such as anything on a tripod or a stand must be set up in the back of the room. If you're going to make an audio recording, please set up over, on this side of the room, and make sure the devices, aren't obstructing anyone else's view of the meeting. You have to allow this to go on. We've had some unfortunate circumstances in the last year where, law enforcement officers have generally not been trained on the requirements for public meetings. However, in my trainings, I've started to let them know that they have to allow members of the public to stay and record, because there have been situations where our law enforcement personnel have been put in unfortunate circumstances when elected officials who weren't aware of the law required that the law enforcement officer remove someone who was legally recording the meeting. It puts the law enforcement officer in a very awkward position. So we've started training our officers. Every time I give a law enforcement presentation, I make sure that they know that if they are called out to a meeting to, provide law enforcement, especially for contentious issues, that they are aware of these recording requirements. The other part of this statute indicates that closed meetings may not be recorded without permission of the public body. So for entities that just record their closed meetings automatically because that's how they create meeting minutes, usually they put something in policy that gives them permission to do that. So that way they're not voting on it every single time to give themselves permission. It used to be that I never even covered that portion of the statute because it affected so few people. The reason I started teaching it was simply because there was one town where a board member walked in, they turned on their phone to record, and they recorded a closed meeting without permission of the public governmental body. And it nearly tore the town in two. It caused such a large problem that from then on, even though it's not been a very frequent complaint, because the fallout was just so severe, I've taught it ever since. You need to make sure that if you want to record a closed session meeting as a board member, that you get the permission of the entire public body. Closed meetings, except to the extent that disclosure is otherwise required by statute, a public governmental body is authorized to close meetings, records, and votes for the reasons listed in section 610.021. There are currently 24 separate reasons to close those meetings. However, we're still waiting on the governor's signature. There may be a 25th that gets added on August 28th. Of course, if that changes, we will be updating our booklet and adding that extra reason for closure. We do want to point out that these closed meeting reasons that are listed in section 610.021 must be interpreted narrowly. We do not want anyone trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. We want to make sure that if you say you're going into a meeting to discuss legal things, that that's all you're discussing. We really do want to make sure that that's exactly why you close the meeting and that's the only topic you discuss. There are some closed meeting authorizations that occur outside of Chapter 610. I've listed some common federal closures that you can use, but if you do need to use one of these authorizations that are outside Chapter 610, you can use them with 610.021 sub 14. That section has to be used with another citation of law. I always refer to it as my little two-legged stool. You have to have another citation used with it, or else it's going to fall over. You can cite that with any juvenile issues. You can cite to it if you have to discuss something that you're using a closure in another Missouri statute or a federal statute. That's still allowed, but make sure you cite to it. HIPAA is, of course, your health information. FERPA is if you're discussing student information. And the DPPA is the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, and that protects the type of information that you would find on someone's driver's license. It was mostly used to protect individuals who had things like ex parte orders or were concerned about their security. But go ahead and use those if you need to. Just cite to 14 before you do. So strict interpretation for closures, as I mentioned about a slide ago, any meeting or vote that is closed pursuant to section 610.021 shall be closed only to the extent necessary to justify, or for the specific reason announced to justify the closed meeting or vote. And you cannot discuss any business in a closed meeting which does not directly relate to the specific reason announced. So let's say you closed your meeting because you wanted to discuss a personnel issue. There was a situation that arose and you wanted to discuss whether or not you should fire or demote an employee. So you close the meeting and you discuss topics under 610.021 sub 13, which is individually identifiable personnel records, and you're also closing under 610.021 sub 3 because you might be voting to discipline or fire someone who works for the city. When you get into the meeting and you're discussing the topic, if it comes up that perhaps this person was not trained on how to handle the situation properly, and you decide, okay, we're not going to demote them, we're going to train them, it would seem like the proper time to go ahead and discuss how are we going to train them? What type of training should we offer? Should we give this type of training to all of our employees? If you're still discussing just one person, you're still just discussing Casey Lawrence, and you're still just discussing offering training to her, that might be something that can still be closed because you're discussing her personnel information. However, if you've decided that everyone in the city who deals with constituents needs to take training on how to de-escalate situations, that's no longer individually identifiable personnel information. That's information about all of your staff that has dealings with constituents receiving training. That's not the reason you went into closed session. I know it's hard to be the person in the closed session that says, hey, I think we're getting off topic. I think this is something else we need to add to maybe a different meeting or a different closed session where we've closed for a different reason. But sometimes you as the members are there without your attorney. And you need to be able to kind of make those calls and say, hey, we need to consider whether or not we're still on topic. We need to consider whether or not we're still discussing these issues. Because ultimately it's you as the board members who are going to be held responsible if there's ever a complaint had about the closed meeting. There is a two-part closure process that's listed in 610.022 for how to close a meeting. The first section is 610.022 part 1, and it says you have to provide the body, the constituents with information about the meeting that you're going to close. You have to have a vote of the majority of the quorum. Then there's part 2 that says you have to have given everyone notice by putting it on an agenda and letting people that know that you're going to have a closed session. The problem with 610.022 is that many attorneys and judges read that differently. There are some attorneys and judges who read that and say you need step 1 or you need step 2. You don't need both. But there are other attorneys, and more importantly, there are other judges who think that you do need both. And they believe that you need to have both the vote and the public notice. So generally, the best practice is to go ahead and have both. They're both pretty inexpensive and not very time consuming. You can post that meeting notice saying you're going to have a closed session, and you can have that public vote of a majority of the quorum. And then there's very little doubt about the fact that you had that meeting properly. I had a former chief counsel who referred to this as the belt and suspenders method. Usually you do not need both a belt and a pair of suspenders to hold up your pants, but if you're wearing both, you can make sure that you're covered and you don't embarrass yourself. It doesn't matter then who sees your agendas or who sees your meeting minutes or which judge or which attorney gets a hold of the case. You've taken both of these steps. You can really ensure at that point and rest a little easier that your meeting's been closed properly. Now, closed meetings are not required. There is nothing in those sections that says you must have a closed meeting record or vote to discuss or act upon any matter. I remember, 3 or 4 years ago, the city of Jefferson had a real estate matter that could have been closed. It was probably permissive for them to talk about that subject in closed session. But it was such a big issue in the town, and there was so much concern about how that land was going to be used, that the body decided to have it in open session just to make it more transparent and kind of reduce the number of questions and reduce the concern the public had, because they were able to attend all of the meetings about how that land deal was going to go down. And it really worked out well in that situation. So don't feel like you have to have a closed session. And again, if you're ever concerned about when a closed session is appropriate, talk to your attorney. That's going to be the individual who's going to know, the background, the history, all the ins and outs of the situation, and they're going to be able to give you the best advice. Location. Public governmental bodies that are holding a closed meeting can only close an existing portion of the meeting facility necessary to hold the members. For some bodies, this means that they remove themselves, that they move off to a different room, a little smaller, a different chamber, a different office, and they have their closed session there. For other bodies, they don't have anywhere else to go, so they have to ask the constituents to wait in the lobby. Please make sure there is a space for people to go, or that if you are going to close the session, that you kind of give an advance warning. I had one very unfortunate circumstance where a lady in the audience had gone to the restroom. She had left her purse with her husband. The body said, "We're going to go into closed session now." The husband got up and left, but left her purse in the closed session meeting. The doors were locked, and she could not leave because the keys to the car were in her purse, and she was there for an hour and a half waiting on the board to come back out. She had to wait outside next to her car because she couldn't get into it. So just make sure you give everybody enough time, get their stuff, and ladies, that's also a good warning. Maybe we don't leave our purses with other people who aren't used to carrying them. So yeah, just make sure you've got a space for everyone to go. The other complaint I heard was a group that was asked to wait out in the rain while the board had their meeting inside. That will definitely lead to sunshine law complaints if your constituents are forced to wait in the rain. Objections. This is an important piece of information for all the board members to be aware of. You can object to closing a portion of the meeting. If a member objects, their objection is required to be recorded in the body's meeting minutes. Any member making the objection shall still be allowed to participate fully and vote on any meeting or record or issue that came up. So they can't be kicked out. Okay, voting. There are a couple of different voting types. It's generally a matter of internal governance. Roll call and voice votes are the most common. The Sunshine Law only requires roll call votes to go into closed session and during closed session. Now, we are aware that there are other times when voice votes are not allowed and roll call votes are required, but those are not addressed in the Sunshine Law, so we can't answer those questions. If you ever have a concern about whether or not a roll call vote is necessary, please contact your attorney. Those roll call votes are, necessary in some online meetings, and in some telephone meetings, they're not allowed for people who aren't in attendance or participating via video conferencing. Those are for emergencies, and those can be found in 610-015 if you ever have a question about voting during an emergency meeting. The Sunshine Law does not preclude members of a public governmental body from participating in voice votes during an online or conference call. Again, those are not your roll call. That's not where you say Alderman Lawrence, Alderman Smith, Alderman Clower. You would have to just say all those in favor, that's your voice vote. And again, 610-015, and that'll be on page 33. Roll call votes. If you have a meeting of elected officials, a member can only participate in the roll call vote if they are physically present or are participating via video conferencing. That video conferencing section was added, I remember 2016 or 2017, so it hasn't been around for very long, but you can go ahead and participate via that video conference. Roll call votes during the emergency meeting. If you have an emergency, and again, you have to announce this as an emergency meeting, a member could participate in a roll call vote if they are not physically present or using video conferencing software, only if a quorum of the body is physically present or participating via that video conference. So if you just have, everyone kind of all on the phone at their own offices or homes, they're not physically present, and you're likely not going to get that roll call vote. But if you have everyone participating via video conferencing, then you are going to be allowed to have that roll call vote. All right, so you have to have a Sunshine Law policy. The Sunshine Law policy is required in section 610-028. It has to be a written policy in compliance with sections 610-010 through 610-030. It has to be open to public inspection. Because of that requirement, many cities just post it online with their ordinances, or make it available right at the front desk so anybody can read through it, because it is a required document for viewing, and some constituents will ask for that kind of as a first request. If you need to update your Sunshine Law policy or change things, if you just want a placeholder, we have a sample resolution that is available online at ago.mo.gov. It doesn't have to be just a placeholder. You can use that as your official policy. Your policy is allowed to be very simple, just the schedule of fees, the address of the custodian, deadlines for filling requests, or it can be more detailed. There are some cities who have, multiple page policies dealing with how records are provided by, different sections of the city staff. That works well for some bigger cities, but for some smaller cities, they do prefer just the more simple kind of one-page resolution regarding the schedule, or regarding their policy and their Sunshine Law schedule. Okay, so complaint process. Our office does receive and review Sunshine Law complaints from the public. Our first step in this process is to educate everyone. We educate the governmental body, we educate the constituents, and we try to let everyone know what those requirements are for the Missouri Sunshine Law. Sometimes we can resolve an issue with just education. I've talked to constituents on the phone who believed there was an issue of a violation. We let them know that that's not what the statute requires, and we can resolve the matter right there. There are other times, though, where we have to mediate. We have to have an investigation or get some documents to kind of parse out what happened on both sides. And we'll kind of use that to navigate any records request issues or what happened at a meeting. But we don't have as many of those. We have about 300 to 400 of those a year, whereas the education issues, we can usually get those resolved, and we have about 700 to 800 of those a year. And then there are the even more rare cases where we will litigate. We have about 3 cases open right now. We try to only litigate in especially egregious situations, situations where mediation and education have failed. while litigation, can get you a decision by a judge, it can get fines, it can get decisions overturned from public meetings, and that can be helpful, but it doesn't always increase communication or transparency. Sometimes it just causes both sides to, just double down on what they thought was right. And they still don't want to talk to each other, and they still don't want to communicate. So we have found that the education and mediation path has really been helpful, but of course, as the Attorney General's office, we are given statutory authority to litigate if necessary. So I will open this back up for questions, and at the same time, I will provide all of my contact information. Let me go ahead and turn my video back on. Does anyone have questions or concerns?
Yes, I wrote mine down. Okay, so my first question, can public comments be removed from the minutes, or are they required to be a part of the record, or can it be somewhere separate? How can public comments be addressed as an attempt to reduce the content of the minutes?
The public comment period is not a statutorily required section of the meeting minutes. I've seen some clerks just kind of give highlights. Mrs. Lawrence addressed the council regarding the question of speed bumps on 32nd Street. Ms. Lawrence spoke in favor. Then we have Mr. Smith address the council on the issue of speed bumps on 32nd Street. Mr. Smith spoke against the issue. You can kind of, give those kinds of topics. That's easy when you do have members who are obviously speaking for or against a topic that is being addressed that night. It does become a little more difficult when you have a member who's bringing up new information. So a constituent addresses the body and they want to address a new topic. Some cities ask for that in writing so that they can just file the constituent concerns with the meeting minutes. They allow them to verbally address the body, but also bring their comments in writing, and then those comments are filed as part of the public record. That's very helpful, especially for limited staff, because then the constituent can go ahead and write it in advance and submit it. That's also nice if the constituent can't actually be there, if they just like to submit it as part of their public comment section. Again, we're not asking that anyone, type out word for word what each constituent said. A generic overview is fine. But again, that's something that you as the board will kind of have to address and decide amongst yourselves.
Okay, so as far as I noticed in the handbook about recording in the closed session, and we have had an person that recorded in the closed session, and it indicated that that would be a misdemeanor, Class C. So how is that addressed when that happens?
Someone would have to file suit against the board member.
Next question is about amending the agenda. So you indicated that it was tentative. So is it okay for us when we amend the agenda on the board meeting day if it doesn't require a vote, or should anything that may require a vote try to be placed on there in advance? What's our option? Say we meet and how we've discussed the budget and we said we want to do a special meeting to continue the conversation and vote. Could, even though it's not on the agenda, is it appropriate if at the beginning we amended it, that would be sufficient enough, or is some advance notice still required?
My favorite attorney answer, again, it depends. If your agenda is already saying that you're going to discuss, the budget for the Parks Department, And then when you arrive at the meeting, everybody kind of realizes that you're going to need to vote on it as well, and you want to amend the agenda to vote on the final version of the budget for the Parks Department. Amending the agenda, can be an appropriate step. Where we seem to get a lot more concern from the public is when you are amending the agenda to add things that perhaps no one would have realized are coming up. So let's say there's a particularly contentious land development issue, and your agenda does not have that listed. If all of a sudden you amend your agenda that night to add this particularly contentious issue, and then you conduct a lot of business on this issue, and then close out the meeting and tell people, oh, well, you missed it, we amended the agenda, we're sorry you weren't there. That's where it's going to be a harder argument to make that says that you really did try to reasonably provide information to the public, because at that point it may not seem to the public that they were reasonably informed if there was nothing on the agenda that led to that. I know, I think it's Jackson County, they have some language on their agenda that indicates that any bill that is at a second read or further along in the legislative process could be voted on at any meeting where it's listed for discussion. And they kind of make that blanket notice at the top of their legislative agenda so that people know that really once we've had a second read on this bill, if there's any time where that bill is listed as a discussion topic, you may want to show up, because that could be the day where they go ahead and take a vote on it, because they may not need to take, a further committee or a further third read, or any amendments may not need to be added. So the body may go ahead and vote on it at that point in time. If that's something your agency is considering, you can talk to your attorney about that type of language. And again, Jackson County has all of this listed online, so you can easily take a look at their documents and kind of see how they've written it and they've proceeded. But that's helpful. I think again, because it is such a short, it's a half sentence that's written about your agenda, and it just says a tentative agenda that must reasonably inform the public of the matters to be considered. So much of that is left up to interpretation that we really encourage agencies to be involved in a race to the top. We want the agencies to be just trying to be as transparent as possible. If you're ever concerned that, members of the public are going to, not generally approve of the fact that you've amended the agenda to add a topic, you might want to consider, having a different meeting where you can provide appropriate notice. I can't give you legal advice on that, but it is something that you'll want to consider carefully when you are having those amendment votes.
Okay, so as far as calling a meeting, our current ordinance says that 4 individuals can call a meeting. So go ahead.
Could I ask something related to what Ms.
Go
Lawrence?
ahead. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So like let's say we want to just discuss something, not vote on it, not do any business with it, but just kind of bring it up to let people aware that's what we're going to just be discussing and voting on in future sessions. Would it be appropriate to amend the agenda to do that?
To just discuss a topic?
Yes, to bring a topic up for discussion and kind of get a consensus of the board and where they stand on that for further consideration, not to vote on an ordinance or anything like that, but oh, maybe we should do, for example, maybe we should do a social media policy ordinance. Is everybody in agreement to that? And kind of have a general discussion, but not vote on anything or direct the, attorney to write an ordinance up, or just kind of have a general discussion about it and go from there with it. Would that be appropriate?
That's more reasonable to have that kind of issue come up, and especially because sometimes those amendments are even constituent led. You know, there may come a topic in the public comment period where a constituent may come to you and say, hey, I heard that such and such town was adding, you know, 2 on-call social workers to their law enforcement team. Would that be something that our city would consider? And at that point, if you really want to amend the agenda and say, gosh, you know, that's really important, we should talk about that. You know, let's add it to, you know, our meeting. Is everybody good with adding it to the September meeting so we can get some information and some background? You know, that's definitely something that we've seen that looks reasonable. Because you're still going to talk about it later on. You're still going to make a public notice. People are still going to know that this was brought up. It's not just, hey, we didn't provide notice, we amended the agenda at the meeting, took care of all 5 steps for the business, approved it, and then people found out about it next month after we did it.
All right.
So it's, that would definitely seem more reasonable than the more extreme situation that I described.
Sure, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me ask you this. Say a person bring an ordinance to the board and it's on the agenda. They read the ordinance and then ask for a vote and a second read for passage. Is that appropriate?
I mean, I can't give legal advice. That's definitely something, though, that, you know, we've seen happen where the agenda was amended to say, hey, we're going to allow for a second read on this particular ordinance. But again, it depends on how, you know, business is generally conducted. If you have cities that usually you know, bring up an ordinance, they do first read of all the bills at the beginning of the meeting, conduct a little bit of other business, have public comment period, and then have second read and votes at the end of the meeting. Their constituents know that's going to happen, and they see it listed as an ordinance, and they know that there could be a vote that night. If, however, it's very rare for your city to do that, you might want to consider that when you're looking at the amendment. You know, are people used to, you know, a first read and then the next month a second read, and then the second read is followed by public comment periods and then a vote by the body. It really depends on kind of how you've conducted public business in the past as to, you know, whether or not that would be a reasonable change. But again, if you're also concerned about, you know, that particular issue, you know, coming up that night, you know, even with less than 24 hours, you can always kind of reach out to your attorney and see if you can get a heads up from them on what they think might be best. If you're ever nervous, remember, you know, nobody ever got in trouble for pushing a topic off. Nobody ever got in trouble for hosting another meeting to discuss the matter.
So if so after the first read, then before the second read, then that should be public comment around that particular issue.
Well, the Sunshine Law doesn't cover that. The Sunshine Law doesn't indicate that you have to have first read and then you have to have public comment, or that you have to have second read and then public comment. That legislative setup is more decided by, well, what class of town you are, and then kind of your ordinances and your policies and procedures. The Sunshine Law isn't going to say what order that has to be taken in. Again, it just says that you have to reasonably inform your public of what you're going to discuss. And if they're used to a certain process and procedure for how ordinances are approved, then that's kind of your level of reasonability that you have to work from.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, as a follow-up, I know that the handbook indicates that public comment is not even required for board meetings, correct? Okay, it's not even required. Okay, so I was beginning to ask about our process and our ordinance around calling meetings. It indicates that 4 board members can call a meeting. It does not specify what that looks like. So all we understand is we ask 3 other people to call the meeting, and then there's a process that happens after that where we let the city clerk know, and then she sends out the communication and notice to the mayor and all the other board members. So is that clear enough to not be a sunshine violation? Because it does not indicate like we have to make a public notice that the 4 people are getting together to call the meeting, you know, so there is nothing that specifies that process. So how?
That seems more like a ministerial function,
Okay.
like the fact that
Okay.
you'd like to call a meeting.
Okay.
You're not discussing the public business that will be discussed at the public meeting. Like you'll have to
Okay.
stay away from that as board members, because I believe with 4, would that be a quorum, or is that just half for your board?
Yeah, so that's just half. So the our ordinance just indicates that 4 people can call it, but then we would need the quorum once we actually get there to have the meeting.
Yeah,
So that's the
yeah.
difference.
At that point, it seems more like a ministerial function that you're asking for the meeting to be called. You send out the request. I'd like to call a meeting on, July 15th. And then the 3 other board members can, tag on and let the clerk know. I don't know if there's a form that you all have to fill in for that, or if there's something that the clerk has that you submit your dates or anything like that. But especially if there's a format, then you could even point to that type of record as, this is us requesting a meeting. This isn't us, discussing other topics. We're just asking for a specific date and time.
Okay, and it was a practice that happened that I knew was off. So that same person that's trying to call a meeting should not be surveying individuals to see if they will come and be in attendance, because that's no longer a ministerial, right?
Well, I mean, it gets tricky. It gets really tricky. Because then you're getting into, now you have a quorum of officials. Once you have a quorum of officials on electronic correspondence, Section 610.025 requires that to be filed as an official record of the public governmental body. You have to make sure it's either copied to your computer as a member or to the custodian of records. So we've created a public record at this point that's likely going to be available to the public for request and review. The process of requesting a meeting to be held in and of itself can be ministerial. It's if you get the quorum together, which would only be 1 more person, and you start having, questions like, okay, is everybody fine with us, meeting on July 15th, and this is what we're going to discuss, and this is what we're going to have, and this is what time. You're kind of still on ministerial functions, but I'm always hesitant. I'm an incredibly risk-averse person. I always believe that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure every day. So I'm always very careful in those situations, because the minute just 1 person gets off topic, you could possibly be having a meeting if you have everyone included. If you have this type of situation where, individuals are allowed to call these types of meetings, outside of the normal meetings, or, outside of the executive calling a meeting, it may be helpful to kind of delineate that process, so that it's not just kind of those open form emails. emails are amazing. You can put all kinds of information, you can attach things, you can communicate with people so quickly. But I've seen people get into trouble so quickly over an email because it's not just one topic. You can discuss so many things in an email. It doesn't matter. You can put anything you want in there. So I'd be very careful with that process. And I'd be very hesitant to say, oh, it's just all good, it's all okay, because I've seen entities get into trouble with it before. So I'll stop.
I think. Oh, I'm sorry. I think this is my last question. I was trying to get them all out so then everybody else can just go at it. Any event, we had a unique situation where we had a general board meeting that we would normally have that was canceled out of process, and we chose, the board continued to have it regardless of it being canceled out of process. When we asked for it to be properly posted on the website, that did not happen. I had to, as an alternative, post it on a social media site that the community would access in order to do it. So it wasn't our attempt to evade the process. We were just having a compliance issue. So do we need, the meeting has happened, but do we need to go back and amend those meeting minutes to indicate the reason why it was not properly posted, which would be an internal issue, or do we leave it as is? What do we do to make sure that that is solidified? Because it was a internal conflict type of issue.
So the Sunshine Law really doesn't cover kind of how to fix issues. There's really no set of procedures for going back and, you know, redoing or repairing or providing a good cause later. What I have seen work relatively well is sometimes a body will rehost a meeting. They'll realize that perhaps it shouldn't have been closed, or they didn't post the meeting notice timely enough. And instead, what they will do is they'll post that notice. They'll make sure they have 24 hours. They'll make sure it's open or closed properly. And then they'll just basically discuss everything again and take all the votes again. And the reason for that is, if you have an improperly closed meeting or an improperly held meeting, if you have a suit filed against you, a judge can overturn anything that occurred during that improperly held meeting. So if you vote on everything again during a properly held meeting, the thought is that if you do have that problem where a judge does overturn things, the judge is overturning a decision that had been made like in July, but in August you made it again. And, you know, the argument is, well, they can't overturn what happened in August because that was a properly held meeting. Again, the Sunshine Law doesn't give any set of instructions for how to fix that. And I can't even say that the process that some of these attorneys have come up with is actually correct or the one you need to use, because there is no statutory authority for it. It's simply kind of the best practice that I've seen a lot of attorneys employ if they feel that their board may need to, you know, retake actions to protect themselves. So as far as rehosting a meeting, that's a question that, you know, you'll have to discuss with the attorney. And of course, in this case, you might have to, you know, have, you know, again, the 4 board members call it, or if there's going to be an executive that calls the meeting, you know, you'll have to go through the full process again. But I can't give you legal advice on that.
Okay, so say it's inclement weather, and our ordinance indicates that in order to cancel a meeting, it normally has to take place in the public setting, like at a regular board meeting. So any event that there is inclement weather and we truly need to cancel as a board, would we need to put a process in place? But if there's not one, what would be the normal way to handle that to avoid votes and things like that?
I don't know, simply because in the Sunshine Law, there's no rules or regulations for how to cancel it. At this point, we're talking about your city's rules and regulations for canceling a meeting, and I can't really speak to that. You know, generally, for canceling a meeting, we've seen any number of things. We've seen, you know, just we've seen police chiefs make the call for a city saying, hey, you know, the roads are bad, my staff's stretched thin, please don't have your meeting tonight, you know, because we can't ensure that we'll be able to, you know, assist all these people who are coming into town for the meeting. And then it's just kind of, you know, posted on the door, canceled, and you put out a notice on social media that it's canceled. You know, the Sunshine Law isn't the entity that's requiring that vote. That's an internal process and procedure. And so, you know, you as the body will have to look at that and see if that's something that's going to work for you. And if it is something you want to stick with, then you'll have to develop, you know, those rules that work in concert with the Sunshine Law, you know, to ensure that you can cancel. You know, for especially like emergency situations, you know, something that no one could have foreseen was going to happen. You know, we don't know all the time that we're going to get, you know, 1.5 inches of ice. It just happens, and we have to cancel meetings. If we get a complaint about a meeting that's canceled, we do let the public know that that's not something that we enforce, because there's no statutory requirement for cancellation rules in the Sunshine Law.
Hey, Casey.
Thank you.
I have a few questions. Hopefully I'll go really fast since we're short for time. But we had a lot of contentions around like we have a meeting called strategic planning, and it is open to the public. And like you said before, public comment is not required at any meeting. But just to piggyback and make sure that it doesn't matter what the name is per Sunshine Law. It just matters if it's opened or closed, and it has to be closed for a reason, right?
Yes, it has to be closed for a reason. You have to give a statutory citation of law that indicates why the meeting is allowed to be closed. But yeah, you can call your meeting anything you want. Those are very helpful headers usually, like, hey, we're having a work session.
Right.
Public knows that at a work session, you're just going to discuss things. Or we're only having an executive session tonight. So the public knows that you're going to be voting on the ordinances that you heard a month ago.
Okay.
It's good information for the public, but again, that open and closed is not tied to your titles. It's only tied to the statutory citations.
Okay, and then like you said something about, we're talking about the emergencies meetings. You said to post the notices as soon as possible, at least 24 hours. But so what constitutes, I guess I'm kind of confused on what makes it an emergency. Like,
I
you know,
wish we had more information about what made it an emergency. We're really just looking for a reasonable issue to cause an emergency. I've seen things like a prosecutor filed charges against a city's police chief, and once they saw that the charges were filed, they had an emergency meeting to remove the police chief from office.
And I understand the reasons. I guess I understand the reasons, but I meant like time frame. Like we meet almost right now we've been meeting every week or multiple times a week, but at least every 2 weeks. So I'm like, if you think something can wait 7 days, is it still considered an emergency? You know, I'm more about the time. I guess
it has to be, emergency means less than 24 hours notice. So you have to be giving less than 24 hours notice for that emergency meeting. You've got to give the good cause, and the requirement is that it is impossible or impractical to push this topic off until the next meeting. This is often used for boards that only meet once a quarter or twice a year. Sometimes business comes up that you just can't push off for 4 more months. So they have to, amend their agenda and discuss it now, and they use it as like an emergency amendment.
Okay.
Or they'll post part of a notice saying, hey, we weren't planning on talking about this, but we got a subpoena in the mail today, so we have to talk about it tonight, because it would be impractical to push it off, 30 days until our next meeting.
Right.
So that impossible or impractical is the standard that we look at.
Right. We just get things called emergency that's a week out, and I just wanted to make sure. So you're saying more like 24 hours. Okay. 24
hours, less than 24 hours is what we consider an emergency.
Okay.
We understand that a monthly meeting is more regularly scheduled. So, if you all want to use a different term, that's fine, but it's up to you. That's a choice the body gets to make.
Okay. And then you said on the notice, because we're meeting virtually, she must post the principal location. She must post a notice like on a principal location and on the website. But we had some issues around it, because I believe before meeting online, it was okay for her to just post it on the principal location, right?
Yes. If you're only meeting in person, it only has to be posted physically at the meeting location. If you're meeting online, though, you need both.
Okay. And Sunshine Law does not talk about pre-meetings at all, right? Because we spend a lot of time in our meetings talking, discussing things, and I feel like that could be talked about before the meeting. We're just going to talk about things the way we used to do it, but Sunshine Law does not give any direction around that, right?
I've never heard the term pre-meeting.
So it was a meeting, we would have an hour right before our regular board meeting where we just discuss stuff. So it would be the whole body, so it was open to the public. It was never an agenda. We just brought up different things that each individual board was thinking about, a member or whatever. Even the mayor would talk about things that had been going on or whatever. The public could be there, but there was no comment from them, but they could comment on it in the regular meeting. So you've never heard of a pre-meeting?
So for clarification, it was called workshop.
Yeah.
So it was a workshop before but it was a pre-meeting, yeah. Pre-meeting workshop.
I've heard that. Okay, I've heard workshops, but even generally for workshops, there's usually a topic, like what's going to be workshopped. Are we workshopping a new ordinance regarding lowering the speed limits inside the city limits? Are we talking about, again, painting the park benches?
Okay, so you say there should be already a tentative agenda as well for a pre-meeting workshop.
Well, it does indicate that you have to reasonably inform the public of the matters to be discussed. And if you're discussing it at that pre-meeting workshop, it would appear that the public would need to know kind of what those topics are. And if it's left up to the board members to kind of each give their own, 10 or 15 minute, section on the workshop, the board members themselves can, forward that information to whoever's putting together the agenda and saying, for my 15 minutes at the pre-meeting workshop, I would like to talk about these speed bumps on 32nd Street. And everyone can just kind of send in what they want, if that's the way that meeting works. And it can all be compiled by the person who puts together the meeting agenda. But to just kind of say workshop or work session or something like that, it kind of falls in the same category as like unfinished business or new business. It's very, very broad, and it doesn't tell the public kind of what they should be expecting when they show up.
Is it appropriate at this workshop, supposedly workshop meeting, for someone to bring up something and then want to vote on it and pass it?
I mean, it really depends on if it was put on the agenda.
Not on the agenda, just people bring up
Yeah.
something and say,
That-
give me a motion, and there's a second, and it is passed.
I would be hesitant about a situation like that. You know, mainly because if all you put on the agenda was that it's a workshop, and then a specific item is brought up and it's asked to be voted on, you know, the public could definitely feel that they've, you know, not been reasonably informed of something that they wanted to know about from their public governmental body. Yeah, without, I mean, again, I can't give legal advice, but I always like to see more information on an agenda rather than less.
And my last one, Casey, so before we used to have like some of our commonly statutes for having a closed session listed at the bottom of our agenda is, you know, obviously there's 24, but we would just have like mainly the ones that we would use often. Is that a good practice? Or, I mean, because when we motion to have a closed session, we always give the statute, but, you know, in the title. But is that, do you think that's good practice or no? Because I didn't see it on your sample agenda.
We don't generally like to see that type of boilerplate language at the bottom of the agenda, because it's basically telling the public every single time that you meet that you're planning to go into closed session for purposes of, you know, 610-021 sub 1, sub 2, sub 3, sub 12, sub 13. I mean, you only have to make the decision on what to go into closed session for 24 hours in advance.
So our attorney should let us know, like most of the time we go in closed session is because the attorney has asked us, or maybe we want it too, but most of the time it's because of the attorney. So you're saying, so we wouldn't know until the attorney's report, which would be on the agenda, but you're saying she or he should tell us beforehand, and it should already be on the agenda that they want it. That's what you're saying.
If you're getting a report from your attorney, it's likely that it's going to be closed. There's usually not a lot that the attorney's going to tell you that's going to be open, because attorney work product and attorney-client communications are considered closed under 610-021. I mean, at that point, if you're getting a report from your attorney, you might want to go ahead and list that as a closed, you know, portion of the meeting because of section 610-021 sub 1. And at that point, the attorney can just let you know, hey, I don't have a report for this month. You know, you can go ahead and take it off the agenda. And that way they can let you know that ahead of time if they're not going to have one. But yeah, if your attorney is planning on addressing something with you, it's very likely that that is closed. The other topics, though, you know, like section 2 is about real estate. It's very unlikely that you're going to have a real estate topic, you know, every single month, or even the possibility of a real estate topic every single month. So having that listed on your agenda is probably unnecessary. The only time we really see that get used for about 6 months straight is when we see 610-021 sub 3 and 610-021 sub 13, and it gets used by school boards at the end of the school year. Teachers will start putting in their indication that they want to end their contracts because they're moving to a new school district, and they usually start that in about March, and it goes to about July. And so that school board is constantly involved in those personnel decisions and receiving those personnel decisions and making those types of hiring calls at the end of the year. So we will see that listed for that one board. But that's usually the only time we start to see those types of issues listed all the time. Or if it's like a board that only meets twice a year, we'll see that type of boilerplate language, because it's very probable that they have all those things to talk about in closed session. I mean, obviously, again, the attorney's report likely to be closed. Everything else, though, you know, real estate, contracts, security systems, banking information, that information is not likely to come up every single month. So you'd want to, you know, list those kind of individually as they come up on your agenda.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question, some questions as well. Could
Okay.
you kind of explain what a ministerial, is that how you pronounce it, function is?
Ministerial, those are functions where you're kind of not making any new decision. You're just performing a function or a duty. Being sworn in is a ministerial function. You're not making any decision. The voters made a decision, and the clerk or the mayor, whoever's swearing you in, is just performing that function. You know, signing a bill, signing a check. The bill has already been voted on. They're going to pay that bill. You signing it is just a function that you're performing as the elected official. You're not making any new decision or discussing any new business. You know, writing an email that says, hey, I will not be able to make it on the meeting on July 7th. I'll only be able to make meetings on Tuesdays and Wednesday nights, or make it on July 9th. I can only make it on Tuesday and Wednesday nights from now on. You know, sending that out to everyone, you know, that's, you know, a ministerial function. It's just saying when you're available. I wish we had better definitions sometimes in the Sunshine Law, because a lot of this is just kind of, we have to go back to the dictionary definition. Attorneys always do that. If they can't find a definition within the statute, they go to the dictionary and they use just the common dictionary definition for a term, and that's how they apply the statute. So yeah, as long as you're not conducting any new business, you're just performing a task.
Okay.
That's what we see as ministerial.
Okay. And then another thing regarding with Miranda's comment about canceling, like for inclement weather or something like that. That would be more the policy of the board, or I mean, some kind of rules of the board that, like, when such and such happens, this is when we cancel these meetings, or there needs to be something additional. I mean, it's not going to be found in the Sunshine Law, I guess is what I'm saying.
It's not. Some agencies put it in their Sunshine Law policies, and that tends to be what flushes out their policies. They'll add like internal guidelines that they work through for calling meetings and for canceling meetings, or for what's going to qualify as an amendment. That really is left up to the body. You just have to make sure that whatever you decide, you know, falls within the guidelines and the requirements of 610.010 through 610.030.
So, okay, yeah. So then, like, so with our Sunshine Law policy, then we could put that kind of stuff in there, then that's where that would probably.
You can. Again, make sure it matches up with not only the statute, but your current ordinances as well. I mean, it does get a bit complicated, making sure all three levels of policies, ordinances, and statutes all match up. But yeah, as long as you can get everything to line up just right, you are the ones who are in charge of making those types of rules.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know if someone else have a question, but on the ministerial one, we have all the people who, like, maybe they want to co-author an ordinance, or they're hosting an event for the city. Is there any parameters that says that they have to do that in a public format, or could they collaborate as a normal person meeting up and drafting like document? Would that be ministerial in nature, since a decision is not being made, but you're collaborating on the content of something to be presented? Okay.
I don't know if it'd be ministerial, but it wouldn't be a meeting. Getting two people together to draft a bill that's going to be, or an ordinance that's going to be, brought up at another meeting is definitely different than, kind of those chain letter meetings I talked about at the beginning of this half of the presentation. If you're getting together with, another ward because you're both kind of experiencing the same frustrations, and you're drafting something that you're going to present and then the whole board's going to vote on, that's very different than a meeting. That's not something that we would generally consider to be a meeting. We see that happen a lot. We'll even see, individual board members invite their constituents out and say, hey, tell me what you think is going on in the town. Tell me what your concerns are. That's a board member meeting with their constituents. That's not a meeting of the public governmental body. That's not one covered by 610. I don't know that it would qualify as really ministerial because no decision was made for that to happen, but it definitely wouldn't be a meeting. You've got less than a quorum and you're not making a final decision on anything. You're just putting together information for the board to consider.
Okay, you mentioned something about what is like a closed personnel record. Since I've been on the board, whether it's been resumes for positions that we vote on or applications for either alderman positions we're filling or commission members we're filling, is that appropriate for us to receive those via email in advance of a decision being made, or does that have to be presented to us in a different format? But in the past, we've received the resumes through email, the applications through email as well, if it's something we vote on. We only have voted on, we only vote on the director seats and then some of the appointments to commissions and to some positions. And then once you answer that, my last question is about, and it may not be a sunshine thing, but maybe it is, would elected official concerns be something that is considered personnel for closed session, or does that have to be in public? So two different things, but I'll let you start with the first.
Okay. The providing documents is not covered by the Sunshine Law when you're talking about giving out the information to the board members. A lot of cities call that the board packet. So it's all the information that you're going to need to read and be prepared on for when you go to the board meeting. You can provide that via email. You can print it off and have people pick it up. That's fine. Providing it in advance is fine because that's not the meeting. That's just the information that you're going to be looking over. If you can get it all in email and just attach it and send it out to everyone, and that's how people can easily read through it, that's great. But if you need to have some people pick it up and some people get an email, that's really going to be an internal process decision. Again, if we have board members that don't have access to the internet, they're going to need a printed copy. So you'll still have to provide that for them. And then for the other question, as far as issues about board members are not considered personnel. They are considered elected officials. So if you ever have to discuss something about a board member, it has to be done in open session.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have another question.
Okay.
So okay, say we're emailing. It's a email addressed to all the alderpersons. And so basically we should not be talking about, or we should not be deciding anything in those emails then, or voting via those.
Yeah, a vote is considered a meeting.
Okay.
And you can have a vote online. If you had a meeting without having a notice, that can be a violation. So
Okay.
that's what that chain of events leads to.
So then voting is considered a meeting.
Yes.
Okay. And then, but to, send the attorney, here's a copy of this bill, and you CC everybody, and you just want her to look over that, then that would be all right. I guess.
That's not a decision. Nobody's making a decision at that point. You're just
saying then is it's the if there's you can't make decisions via email or anything like that. I guess that's the guideline. That's the parameter. As long as you're not making any decisions, you're pretty okay.
Don't be making decisions for staff to go do things. If you just say, hey, here's the ordinance we'd like you to review and revise and bring to the next meeting, you're giving the information. She's going to review it as your attorney. She's going to bring it back, and you're going to talk about the ordinance in public meeting. That's different. That's different than saying, yes, I agree that whatever revisions the attorney comes up with, I'm going to be voting for this ordinance. And then everybody else chimes in and says, oh yeah, me too, me too, me too. And then all of a sudden we voted on things. And the next thing you know, you sent it to the clerk to go ahead and list as an ordinance before having that public meeting.
Right. But you could do it as long as you notified the public that you were having a email, I don't know, inviting. I don't know how you would email meeting.
I've seen one email meeting.
Okay.
I've seen one. It was odd and awkward, but I've seen it. And they called an online meeting. It was an emergency situation. Basically, the snowplow needed new chains on the tires, or no tires or something like that. It was crazy. But they basically posted a notice, and they said all board members have to email us their decision on this purchase, because it was going to be one of those things that was over $2,500. And they told the public that they would publish all the emails at a certain time so everybody could see all the board members' votes. And then the motion carried, and they bought the things that they needed for the snowplow. So it was weird, but it provided, they provided the notice, they provided the emails afterwards. Probably not the most efficient way to get business done. Almost a conference call would be easier, and you could still have voice votes. But yeah, just avoid those decisions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just one follow-up question for clarity. You said if we're online doing these Zoom calls and we're voting by roll call, we have to have our video on, but if we're doing yays and nays, we don't?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So,
because you want to be able to attribute each person's individual vote to them, and if you can't see them, we can't attribute.
All right.
So with a person who has technical difficulties and has to come in by phone, what option do we have for them? Because like their phone number is visible, that's attached to them, that the city clerk has associated with them. Is that still appropriate given a technical difficulty in the middle of a meeting or something like that?
I haven't seen where that's been allowed. If you are in an emergency situation, then you have a quorum still appearing via video conferencing, then you would be allowed to vote without appearing on video conference if it was an emergency. If it's a regular meeting and you're having technical difficulties, then it doesn't seem like you'd be allowed to vote.
Or if you don't have internet, what if they don't have like a laptop or internet access like that?
Again, you have to have the video conferencing component to be able to participate in a roll call vote if it's not an emergency situation.
Okay.
So in that instance, if you said if we have a quorum, then it can be allowed, but if it's not, like if we have a quorum of people who you can see on video, then the rest could do that through the phone portion. Is that?
Only if it's an emergency.
Okay, and so if we ever have that situation and we don't have the quorum and it's not an emergency, then we will have to postpone that vote to another meeting.
Either that, yeah, you probably have to postpone it unless you could have it by voice. And if you can't have it by voice, then yeah, you probably have to
Oh,
postpone
okay,
it.
like with a yay and nay.
With all in favor or all opposed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But just for, so when we get ready to go in closed session will be the example, because you said closed sessions and
You
going
must
and
vote roll
opening
call.
up the closed session are the ones that require the roll call vote. So if that's the only time that could potentially be an issue that we could not substitute a yay and nay for.
Those would
Okay,
be,
gotcha.
there might be some other expenditures that would require you to have that type of roll call vote. Those aren't all covered in the Sunshine Law. But if you are ever concerned that you need a roll call vote, you can ask your attorney if one is necessary for a particular topic.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Dorothy, and roll call votes are required to pass ordinances in the city.
Okay. Then you will definitely need to make sure you've got your video camera on if you're wanting to pass an ordinance.
If there are no other questions, I wanted to ask you something, Casey.
Okay.
I wanted you to talk about the process for calling closed session meetings. In the city of Bellefontaine neighbors, the mayor sets the agenda. Let's assume there was not a vote for a roll call meeting at a previous meeting of the board. However, at an upcoming meeting, there is a need for a closed session to discuss litigation or any of those matters that can be discussed in closed session. Is it appropriate for the mayor to add a closed session to the agenda, which he sets, and then call for a vote on that closed session once we get to the meeting?
Yeah, the vote does not have to be held far in advance of the closed meeting. You can have the vote like the month before if that's what you prefer, but if you need to have it the day of the meeting, you can have that the day of the meeting. And if he's adding the agenda item, again, if it's more than 24 hours in advance, you just put it on the agenda and you've posted it. And that meets the Sunshine Law's requirements. If there's something different for the city, I wouldn't be able to speak to that, but 24 hours in advance is what we're looking for in the Sunshine Law. And so you can post it saying we're going to have a closed meeting under 610-021 sub 1. We'll be speaking with our attorney. The night of the meeting comes, it's 8 o'clock, you're going to go into closed session. You have the vote, majority of the quorum votes to go into closed session, that carries, and then you can go into closed session.
All right. I just want to establish that it would be appropriate for the mayor as the individual who's setting the agenda to list the closed session on the agenda, but then have the vote to go into closed session at the meeting.
Yes, you can have it at that meeting. You don't have to have it prior.
All right. The other question that I have has to do with the strategic planning issue that came up earlier. While I agree that the Sunshine Law doesn't tell you what to call your meetings, in the city, strategic planning is supposed to lie with the mayor. There is some concern that because our ordinances establish that when meetings are held and called strategic planning meetings, those mislead the public. The Sunshine Law does not address that issue, but the city's code of ordinances does.
Okay.
So the city's code in that instance would trump. Is that not correct?
The city's code wouldn't be able to say it's open or closed.
No,
The city's code.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, you would call it the strategic planning session. And whoever is allowed to create the agenda for the strategic planning session, according to code, would be the one who's allowed to create that. The Sunshine Law would just ask that the notice be posted 24 hours in advance, the agenda be reasonably worded to inform the public of the matters to be considered, and then meeting minutes are kept. If it's going to be open or closed, do let the public know, because if it's going to be closed, you don't want them to come all the way down and then tell them it's closed afterwards, and then they have to, hike all the way back when it could have been shared on the agenda.
And maybe my question was not artfully worded. What I'm saying in essence is that the code delegates the responsibility of calling a strategic planning meeting to the mayor.
Okay.
So there has been some concern that when meetings are called and they're not called by the mayor and labeled as strategic planning, then they are misleading to the public. I just want to establish, based on what you said earlier, that in this instance, it would be the city's code that would govern.
Yeah, the city's code would decide that. The Sunshine Law wouldn't have anything to do with the official title of the meeting, just whether it was open or closed.
I agree with you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just so I'm clear then too. So when we're talking about titling meetings and stuff, because there's a lot of confusion in our community about titles, and I agree with Attorney White Coleman. Strategic planning is a function of the mayor per our ordinance, and there have been monthly meetings called strategic planning. We could still have those meetings, but I think a better term would be like maybe legislative planning or legislative agenda, what we want to accomplish, because that's more in our sphere, and this is what we want to do as a body for the upcoming year legislatively. And then whatever the mayor wants to do strategic planningly, hopefully we could all coordinate that, that he could start holding meetings and start that process. And that we could kind of be an adjunct to kind of figure out what we need to do, to help facilitate that, or what ordinances that we need to pass to do that. Would that be proper?
Yeah, and that's definitely a local decision. You all have that power and authority to kind of decide how you want that handled. We at the Attorney General's office, we would stay out of that decision. It's all up to local control.
So let me ask you this, and maybe you don't know, and that's fine, and maybe it's a question for a different training. But so like within the BOA, the Board of Aldermen and everything like that, then we would be setting the rules, kind of like what you're talking about, like how to title these meetings. If we felt it was necessary to title a meeting, that function would fall kind of to the BOA, and we could either do that through like a an update to our sunshine law ordinance. Is that correct?
I don't know if that would fall within the sunshine law ordinance unless you were specifically saying all strategic planning meetings will be considered open under the sunshine law versus all executive sessions being considered closed.
So then that might be like more of a bylaws kind of the Board of Aldermen, like the rules.
that might be more bylaws.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think for clarification, Casey, we are talking about a function or ordinance that we may write that declares something to be the case versus, because if it's public, then we're doing our job. If we call it something, like you said, it gives the audience an indication of what will be discussed. And for us, it was just something that we call strategic planning, where strategic planning as an implementation was not taking place. And it was for the mayor to attend. His choice to not attend has nothing to do with, violating his function. So it was just something that we chose to call it as that and voted on that title and started having meetings where we discussed issues within the city, but then we had individuals that chose not to attend, which has nothing to do with undermining that person's authority. So that's the history of it. So we're talking about what we call something, which we can call it whatever we want to, and it just needs to be denoted as a public meeting and have an agenda for everything that we have, so then people would know what to expect for the conversation at the time, based on what you said.
Yeah.
Okay.
But those agendas I think our agendas, though, this is just for Miranda or anybody on the board, that, I think our agendas need to be a little bit more specific as to what we're, talking about instead of budget. Exactly what are we going to be talking about in the budget, because there's a whole bunch to the budget. And I think we need to be more diligent about being more specific as to what we're talking about, what we're going to be discussing or bringing up.
We do always like to see specificity on those agendas, but yeah, that definitely sounds like more of an internal conversation. I think we've covered just about everything about a meeting you can cover. Do we have any other questions tonight? And again, if you need me to put my contact information, again, I can. I can take questions. Again, I can't offer legal advice. I'll be happy to point you to the right statute if necessary. But yeah, you can give us a call, send us an email. We'll be happy to help. Maybe next year we can even come by in person and actually see everybody in the city. But yeah, I really appreciate you all putting this together and, taking the time, to volunteer for a sunshine law training. Not everybody volunteers. Some people have to be brought forcefully to the screen. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for facilitating. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've been very helpful to us, and we appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, have a good night, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Okay, bye.